A good Hoidesh Tov. Welcome, my friends. It's so good to be back. Nina and I and our children had a wonderful family reunion with my brother's family, the kids' cousins. Kept the reading going. So excited to be back with you. We're going to cover 6 dafs, 6 pages today. There's actually 9 left in Tractate Gittin, the 19th volume of the Talmud. But I always try, even on a highlight show, to keep it to an hour. So I think if we do the 6 pages today, highlights obviously, and then tomorrow we'll do the 3 pages and make a siyum, right? So tomorrow, the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, and then we'll make a siyum on Tractate Gittin. So bring a drink to make a l'chaim, maybe a nibble to make a bracha. And but today is Rosh Chodesh Elul. It's the beginning of the last month of the Hebrew year. So we're counting down the days until the new year, meaning Rosh Hashanah. And in the month of Elul, we have a tradition to blow the shofar every day. So this one's for you, my holy brothers and sisters. The energy. Our sages teach that in Elul, the king is in the field, meaning that God makes God's presence a little bit closer, more accessible to us. This is a month to examine our deeds, to reflect on what went right in the last year, what didn't go so right, what changes we can make, what changes we aspire to make, to ask God to help us to make those changes. And any time we're examining our behavior and lifting ourselves up, ask God, help me do better, to be a better man, a better woman, a better Jew, a better citizen, a better sibling, a better child, a better parent, etc. To do better in our communities. That's a prayer God loves. It's always answered. He provides us a little extra strength in those goals. And this is a month that's such a propitious time to do that kind of work as we prepare for the days of awe. And that's why we say the king is in the field. God is very close to us in this period. And so what better time to be studying the oral tradition, to be studying the Talmud. So let's get to it. We're opening chapter 9 today, the final chapter of Tractate Gittin. We're on page 82, starting at 82a with Mishna number 1 of Tractate Gittin. And look, I've been away a few days, I forgot everything. Let's light up the darkness. And let's welcome Paul in Chicago, Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehud in South Carolina, Carla in Brazil, Leona in Southern Illinois, Paul in the Great Northwest, Pam in Oregon, Melissa in Great Neck. Wait a minute, skipped on me. Melissa in Great Neck, Shandora in the Bronx, Bella in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey, I assume, Ryan in Florida, Bill in mid-Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Belle in Texas, Joe in the Inland Empire, Zach in Las Vegas, Karen in Northern California, Ella is with us, Debbie in New Jersey, Lynn in Silver Spring, Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. It's really good to be back. All right. Mishnah number 1, chapter 9, the final chapter in Tractate Gittin. We're on page 82 with Mishnah number 1. With regard to one who divorces his wife and said to her while handing her the get, "You are hereby permitted to marry any man except," and we're translating ellah. The word ellah, right now it's being translated as except. So you are hereby permitted to marry any man, ellah, for so-and-so, meaning except for so-and-so. So imagine a husband's telling his wife, "You're divorced. Here's your get. We're now divorced." But it only is a valid divorce. This only becomes a real divorce. I mean, it becomes a divorce if you will not marry some guy, right? So for whatever reason, this husband says you can marry anyone you want, you're permitted to any other man, it means we're divorced, but we're only divorced on condition that you don't marry so-and-so. That's the condition. So if the man says this, Rabbi Eliezer permits her to remarry based on this divorce, meaning it is a divorce. But the rabbis, the majority who disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, prohibit her from remarrying, meaning she's not divorced. Why? Because their bond is not entirely severed by this divorce document, this get, and she is therefore still his wife. So what should he do so that the divorce may take effect? He should take it from her, take back the get, and hand it to her again, and he should say to her, you are hereby permitted to marry any man. And if he wrote his qualification inside the get, then even if he took it back and handed it to her, and while he took it back, he erased that language from the get, it is invalid. That get cannot be used. You cannot create this kind of a condition. Now, as we'll see, you could say to a woman, this is your get on condition that you will abstain from drinking wine for 30 days. And she abstains, so then at the end of 30 days, it's a full divorce. They go their separate ways. He has no hold on her. But if he says to her, this is your get on condition that you never drink wine for the rest of your life, no, he hasn't severed their bond. And likewise, he says, you are hereby permitted to marry any man on earth. 4 billion men, you can marry any one of them, except for this one guy. But he's putting a condition on her that is true into the future, and so he has a hold on her, and the Mishnah says, no, you can't do that. That's Mishnah number 1. However, that now the Gemara is going to challenge this language a little bit, right? Does the word ellah mean except that you can marry, you are hereby permitted to any other man on earth except for so-and-so? So does the word ellah actually mean except? Ravina said, come and hear a solution. So I've skipped a few paragraphs. Come and hear a solution to this dilemma. Very hot in here. Come and hear a solution to this dilemma from the following Mishnah and Tractate Negayim. All houses become ritually impure through leprous sores of the house. Right, so we talk about tsaras, which is normally a skin condition, but the Torah also has provision for tsaras of a house, right? And so this no longer exists, but when the temple was standing, the spiritual level of the nation was much higher. Sometimes they would actually find tsaras, this skin condition, not on a person's skin, but in the walls of a house. It's not mold, it's something else. It's a spiritual malady. Might be related to the fact that, improper speech was used within the house, might not. At any rate, with regard to that condition, Ravina said, come a solution to this dilemma from the following Mishnah. All houses become tameh, ritually impure, through this tsaras of the house, except ellah, for those belonging to Gentiles, right? This is only a condition that affects the Jewish people. It doesn't even affect us anymore because our spiritual level is lower. But again, just like kosher eating is not something that Gentiles are obligated in, nor are they susceptible to tsaras of a house, even when that existed. Now, granted, if you say that the meaning of the word ellah means except, then this Mishnah is well understood. But if you say that the word ellah means on the condition that, right? So meaning that you might have read our Mishnah as one who divorces his wife and said to her, you are hereby permitted to marry any man on condition that you marry so-and-so, then it's a very different meaning, right? So granted, if you say that the meaning of the word ellah is except, then in this use of the word except, or the use of the word ellah, with respect to this teaching about tsaras of the home, that all houses of Jews are susceptible to that, but not houses of Gentiles, then it makes sense. But if you say that the word means is on the condition, the resulting interpretation of the Mishnah is that the houses of Jews become impure only on the condition that the houses of Gentiles do not become impure. Consequently, if the houses of Gentiles become impure, the houses of Jews do not become impure. Does this interpretation make any sense? So you might have said, oh, okay, what they meant in the Mishnah is, this is hereby your get, you are hereby permitted to any other man on condition that you don't marry so-and-so, that you don't marry so-and-so. Now that doesn't really make sense. Now that's different than you are hereby permitted to any man except so-and-so versus you are hereby permitted to any man on the condition that you don't marry so-and-so. So that's the difference in language here. So on the condition, where am I? So that wouldn't make sense. Moreover, an objection against the interpretation may be raised as follows. Do the houses of Gentiles become ritually impure at all? But isn't it taught in a baraisa that from the verse, and I put the plague of tsaras in a house of the land of in your possession, it is derived only that the land of your possession, i.e. the houses of Jews, can become tameh, ritually impure, through tsaras of a house. But the houses of Gentiles do not become tameh through tsaras. So rather conclude from the Mishnah that the meaning of the word ellah is except, and the Gemara conclude that ellah means except. So this get that says you are hereby permitted to any man except so-and-so creates a condition that is ongoing, right? It creates a hold on the wife beyond the divorce, and that invalidates the get because he can't have a hold on the behavior of his wife after he divorces her, or it won't be a divorce. Now we skip forward to the bottom of page 82b. Abaye raises a dilemma. If a man said to his wife while handing her a get, you are hereby permitted to marry any man except for Reuven and Shimon, and he then said to her, actually, you are permitted to marry Reuven and Shimon, then what is the law? Right? So we just said you can't say, it's not a valid get if you say you are hereby permitted to any man except Reuven. That's not a valid get. Add Reuven and Shimon, doesn't really make any difference. But then he removes the condition. Now he's doing it orally. So he says, here is your get. You are hereby permitted to marry any man except Reuven and Shimon. But then he says, you know what? I take it back. You can marry any man, period. So the get that he gave her was definitely invalid. Does removing the condition, removing this hold on her, validate, make that get valid? That is what Abaye is asking. So do we say that what he forbade initially, he then permitted, enabling her to marry anyone, including Reuven and Shimon, in which case the severance is complete and the get is valid, they are divorced? Or perhaps what he forbade initially, he then permitted, permitting her to marry Reuven and Shimon, and what he permitted initially, he then forbade, i.e. he permitted her only to Reuven and Shimon, excluding all other men. Right? Oh, okay, so here's Abaye's asking a different question. He says, you are hereby permitted to marry any man except for Reuven and Shimon. And he then said to her, Reuven and Shimon. It seems like Rav Steinsaltz is adding, you are permitted to marry Reuven and Shimon. Rather, he says to what the Gemara originally said, the Aramaic, is you are hereby permitted to any man except for Reuven and Shimon, and he then said to her, to Reuven and Shimon. So Abaye is asking, oh, well, did he say, well, what I initially forbid you to do, I now permit, so it's a valid get? Or is he saying, I hereby, you're permitted to any man except Reuven and Shimon, and then he changed the language all the way to, you may only marry Reuven and Shimon. Now, if he said that, I'm sure it's not going to be valid. No way. If he says that you can marry any of the 4 billion men in the world except one, and that's no good, how is he going to possibly say to her, this is your get, and you must marry one or two people? That doesn't sound like it's going to work, is it? So let's see. And he then forbade, he permitted, and if you say that what he initially forbade, he then permitted, enabling her to marry anyone she wishes, what is the law? If he said the second, wait a minute. Okay, so let me just read it again. So do we say that what he forbade initially, he then permitted, enabling her to marry anyone, including Reuven and Shimon, in which case the severance is complete? It sounds like it is a good get. Or perhaps what he forbade initially, he then permitting her to marry Reuben and Shimon. And what he permitted initially, he then forbade, i.e. he permitted her only to Reuben and Shimon, right? He said you can't marry Reuben and Shimon, and then he switched it to you can. But initially he said you can marry anyone you want, and maybe now he's swapping that too, and that's why he's saying you can only marry Reuben and Shimon if you're going to remarry. Did he mean that? So did he mean that she is permitted to marry Reuben, and the same is true with regard to Shimon, i.e. she's permitted to marry him as well? Is the fact that he mentioned only that she is permitted to marry Reuben because he opened his prior qualification by mentioning him before he mentioned Shimon, but he intended to permit her to marry Shimon as well? Or did he perhaps specifically intend to permit her to marry Reuben and not Shimon? And if you say that he intended to permit her to marry specifically Reuben and not Shimon, what is the law if he said that she is permitted to marry Shimon? Did he mean that she is permitted to marry Shimon, and the same is true with regard to Reuben? And the fact that he mentioned only Shimon is because he ended his initial previous statement by mentioning him? Or perhaps he was specifically referring only to Shimon. Now, you can see what Abaye is doing is he's drilling down and saying the husband made an ambiguous statement. And it didn't sound very ambiguous, but if we examine it, there's a lot of different ways to take that statement. Abaye is saying if there's all these possible interpretations of his statement, how could we possibly say this is a valid divorce? It's too ambiguous. In every situation we've had so far is we want to do everything in our power, as budding sages. If we were entrusted to administrate a get, a divorce, where the husband is going to give his wife a get, we would demand that he be as clear as possible, because if you create an uncertain divorce, that's a huge problem for everybody. If she marries based on an uncertain divorce, then she has not a real marriage the second time. There's a doubt that she was ever divorced in the first place. Her children with the second husband will be mamzers. She won't be permitted to marry neither the second husband. She have to leave him. She won't be able to go back to the first husband. It's a mess. So if there's this many possible interpretations of what the husband said to her regarding Reuben and Shimon, bad, right? Rav Ashi raises another dilemma with regard to the same case. If he said to her the second time, you are also permitted to marry Shimon, then what is the law? Is the word also referring to Reuben, i.e. she's permitted to marry Shimon in addition to Reuben? Or perhaps it is also referring to everyone, i.e. she's permitted to marry Shimon in addition to all men, but not Reuben. Taiku, this dilemma shall stand unresolved. Now, this is one of those cases where it's not just that the sages elected not to resolve a dilemma. When they say taiku with respect to a dilemma about divorce, it means that if people did that, if a get was given with using this language, it would create an uncertain divorce, and you would have to just get this husband to give her the get again with clear language, both in the get and orally, if he gives oral language along with it. Now, the sages taught in the Tosefta 9:1, after the death of Rabbi Eliezer, 4 sages entered the discussion to refute his statement. And they were Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Tarfon responded to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, saying, if after the husband stipulated that the wife not marry a certain man, and she went and married the brother of the one to whom she was prohibited from marrying, and this husband died without children, she cannot perform yibum, levirate marriage, with her husband's brother because he is forbidden to her due to the stipulation of her first husband. Right? Now remember, in the Mishna, Rabbi Eliezer permits one to give a get saying, okay, you are permitted to all other men in the world except for so-and-so. Now, that's not a valid get because the majority overrode Rabbi Eliezer. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, where you can do this, so now these other rabbis are saying, come on, Rabbi Eliezer is wrong, and here's why he's wrong. Right? So Rabbi Tarfon is saying, if after the husband stipulated that the wife not marry a certain man, so then she went and married his brother, okay, now she's not allowed to marry so-and-so. She doesn't. She marries his brother. But then, if the brother dies before he has a child, now she falls for yibum with this man that her first husband told her, you can't marry him, right? You can never marry him. So if she performs yibum, having married that guy's brother, and then the brother died, and now she marries a guy she was originally prohibited to marry, or she's up to marry him, yibum. She has a Torah obligation to perform yibum or chalitza. The chalitza is a way out, the ritual that releases you from levirate marriage, from yibum. But here how Rabbi Tarfon is arguing, right? So this husband died without children, so she cannot perform yibum with her husband's brother because he is forbidden to her due to the stipulation of her first husband, which is valid according to Rabbi Eliezer. So is the first husband not found to be uprooting a matter of Torah law through his stipulation? And you have therefore derived that this is not an act of severance. In other words, if the first husband makes a stipulation, you're permitted to all men in the world except for so-and-so, well, a situation could arise where, according to Torah law, she'd be obligated in yibum to this man that the husband said you can never marry him, or else this is not a valid get. It would retroactively cancel the divorce, right? She relied on that divorce to marry that guy's brother. Then that second husband dies, and now she's not going to be able to perform yibum because of a stipulation the husband made. So can a person make a stipulation in a legal document like a get that would uproot a Torah law? Rabbi Tarfon says no. Therefore, such a stipulation cannot possibly be valid. Rabbi Yosei handles this argument a different way. He says that Rabbi Eliezer is wrong. Why? Where do we find an example of something that is forbidden to this person and permitted to that other person? What is forbidden to everyone, and what is permitted to everyone. And this contradicts Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that a divorcee can be prohibited from marrying a certain man and permitted to marry all other men. You have therefore derived that this is not an act of severance. So Rabbi Yosei is saying, how can this husband, in divorcing his wife, by his choice, make a distinction between one guy and all the other men in the world that his wife has to adhere to? Who is he to make such a distinction? I mean, the Torah will say, Jews have to eat kosher, non-Jews don't. Okay, the Torah makes distinctions like that. But who is the husband to create such a distinction? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah takes a different approach. He says, what is the meaning of the expression scroll of severance? Right? That's what a get is, a scroll of severance, which is used in the Torah when referring to a get, right? Scroll of severance. It means something that severs the bond between him and her entirely. And this woman, by contrast, is still bound to her husband after their divorce, as his stipulation prevents her from marrying a certain man. So you have therefore derived this is not an act of severance, and therefore the get is not valid. Rabbi Akiva responded saying, if after the husband stipulated that the wife not marry a certain man, she went and married a man from the general public, and she had children with him, and she was subsequently widowed or divorced from the second husband, and she then arose and married the one to whom she was forbidden by her first husband's condition, isn't the bill of divorce thereby found to be nullified? And would this not render her children from her second marriage as born from an adulterous relationship? Right? If she said, the first husband said, you're divorced as long as you don't marry so-and-so. So she doesn't marry so-and-so. She goes and marries some other guy. And she has children with the second husband. Then the second husband dies. If she then goes and marries the guy that her first husband prohibited, wouldn't that retroactively go back and nullify the get? So she was never actually divorced from her first husband. In that situation, the children with the second husband was not her husband, was not a marriage. Her children are mom's. Disaster. Are we going to permit this to happen? Of course not. You have therefore derived that this is not an act of severance. It cannot be an act of severance, says Rabbi Akiva, for that reason. Now, the Gemara will go on to analyze these four refutations of Rabbi Eliezer by Rabbis Tarfon, Yosei, Elazar ben Azariah, and Akiva in greater depth, and we are skipping forward to page 83b, about halfway down the page, and we're looking at this question of, can it be that what one prohibits, another permits? The Gemara discusses this matter with regard to a case where a man divorces his wife, and he said to her, you are hereby permitted to marry any man except for so-and-so. And she went and married someone from the general public and was subsequently widowed or divorced from him. So Rabbi Eliezer concedes that she is now permitted to marry the man whom she was initially prohibited from marrying. Right? So even Rabbi Eliezer would say, no. If she marries some other guy, then, there's a total severance from the first husband. She fulfilled his condition. She married anyone in the world except the one who was prohibited. And at that point, that divorce is finalized and can't be reopened in any way. So she goes for her third husband to marry the guy that her first husband prohibited at the time of divorce. Even Rabbi Eliezer would concede that that's fine, even according to him. We don't follow Rabbi Eliezer anyway, but even according to him, that situation would not trigger a problem. Now the Brisa continues, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar raised a refutation to Rabbi Eliezer's statement. Where do we find a situation where one person prohibits something and another person permits it? How can the first husband render the woman prohibited from marrying a certain man, and her second husband renders her permitted to do so after the second husband's death or divorce? How can the first husband made all the men in the world permitted except one, and then the second husband, by virtue of marrying her, not creating such a condition before he died or divorced her, now renders that man that the first husband prohibited, now he's rendered permitted? How does the second husband have the power to do that? Asks Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Now the Gemara questions this refutation of Rabbi Eliezer. Is there not such a situation where one person prohibits something and another person renders it permitted? But isn't there the case of a yavama, right? So this is a widow whose husband died childless and he left a brother. And he deems her, the surviving brother, deems her forbidden to all other men while she waits for him, right? In other words, until she either performs yibum with the surviving brother or chalitza with him, she can't marry other men, right? So he's the yavam. The surviving brother is the yavam. So the yavam renders the yavama prohibited to all other men until they perform yibum or chalitza. Okay, so then what? And the yavam. So what they're saying is it's not the yavam who renders her prohibited to all other men. It was the dead husband. The dead husband renders her prohibited to all other men except the yavam. Then the yavam, when he performs chalitza with her, renders her permitted to all other men. So you have a case where one renders her prohibited and another one renders her permitted. So that doesn't seem like a refutation. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's refutation doesn't work as a refutation, right? Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that Rabbi Eliezer's point is no good and uses this logic as the refutation. So that's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's question. We have a case where one person makes her prohibited and another woman makes her permitted. So it should work. The Gemara answers, there it is the yavam who renders her forbidden, since if not for the yavam, the surviving brother, i.e. if her deceased husband did not have any brothers, she would have already been released from her bond to her first husband and permitted to marry any other man. It is only the existence of the yavam that prevents her from marrying other men. Therefore, it is also the yavam, when he performs chalitza, that renders her permitted. So in other words, the same guy who prohibits permits. It's not that a different guy renders her prohibited one man renders her prohibited and a different man renders her permitted. So then the Gemara says, okay, well, isn't there the matter of vows, where the one who takes the vow prohibits something, and he can go to a halakhic, prohibits something to himself, right? I take a vow, bli neder, that I will never eat bananas, right? I take a vow before God. So now bananas are prohibited to me. I can go to a halakhic authority, a rabbi, and say, can you get me out of this vow? And he would say to me, if you had known when you took this vow what the reality of living with a life prohibited of bananas for the rest of your life would be like, would you have taken it? I would say no. And he says, so based on your regret, I can dissolve that vow for you. So I made bananas prohibited to me, and the halakhic authority would render them permitted to me again. So one person prohibits and another permits. There's an example. And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan says that a halakhic authority dissolves a vow only through the regret of a person who took the vow. Since it is necessary for this person to express regret for taking the vow, it is not actually the halakhic authority who renders that prohibited item permitted, it's the person himself. So the Gemara asks, isn't there the nullification of a wife's vows by the husband, where the wife vows, creating a prohibition, and her husband nullifies the vow? Husbands can do that for their wives. And the Gemara answers there, it can be explained in accordance with that which Rav Pinchas reasoned in the name of Rava, as Rav Pinchas says in the name of Rava, that with regard to any man who takes a vow, it is from the outset contingent, that with regard to any woman who takes a vow, it is from the outset contingent on her husband's consent that she takes the vow. Therefore, the husband can nullify it, but it was he who permitted it in the first place. New subject. The Gemara resumes the discussion of the previous Baraisa. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah responded saying, what is the meaning of the expression scroll of severance? Right. So it's different. This is what the Torah calls a get. So keritut, scroll of keritut. That is used in the Torah for a get. It means something that severs the bond between husband and wife completely. You have therefore derived that this divorce, after which the wife is still bound to her husband due to his qualification, that she's permitted to all other men in the world except for so-and-so, this is not an act of total severance, and therefore it is not a divorce. And the Gemara asks, and what do the other rabbis who did not refute Rabbi Eliezer's opinion in this matter do with this term severance? How do they interpret it? And the Gemara answers, they need it for that which is taught in a Baraisa. If a man says to his wife, this is your get on the condition that you will not ever drink wine, or on the condition that you will never go to your father's house, that is not an act of severance, as she remains restricted by him indefinitely. If the husband stipulates that she may not do so for 30 days, then this is severance, because she can just, abstain from wine or from going to her father's house for 30 days. Then the divorce kicks in and they are entirely severed. He has no control or hold on her in the future at all. Where am I? That is an act of severance. And the Gemara asks, and from where does the other sage, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, derive this principle? And the Gemara answers, it is derived from the fact that the verse does not utilize the basic form of the word severance, i.e. kares, but rather its conjugate, keritut. And this indicates an additional principle that is derived from the term. And the Gemara asks, and what do the other sages derive from the seemingly superfluous use of this word? And the Gemara answers, they do not interpret the distinction between karet and karitut. So that's how the sages derive that the severance has to be a total severance. We skip a bunch of paragraphs. Now we're on 84a. The sages taught, Tosefta 6:7, that if a man says to his wife, this is your get, on the condition that you marry so-and-so. Okay, now this is the opposite case. Instead of saying, this is your get, you are hereby permitted to all other men in the world except for so-and-so. Now we have the case of, this is your get, on the condition that you marry so-and-so. So you're only divorced from me if you marry so-and-so. Is this going to be a valid get? This is your bill of divorce on the condition that you marry so-and-so. She may not marry that man. But if she does marry him, the marriage is valid and she need not leave her husband. And the Gemara asks, what is the Baraisa saying? She is forbidden from marrying whom? Rav Nachman said that this is what the Baraisa is saying. She may not marry him, i.e. she may not marry the man mentioned by her husband in the condition, lest people say that these people are giving their wives to each other as a gift. But if she marries another man, she need not leave him. So interesting. This is your get on the condition that you marry so-and-so. Okay, so you might think, well, okay, then she has the husband is just saying, look, I don't want to divorce you. But if you're going to marry that guy, fine. Then we're divorced and you go marry him. When you marry him, we're divorced. The sage is saying you can't do that. And not only can you not do that, but if the guy says this, she cannot marry that guy ever. All right? At least not based on this divorce. But it seems like they're saying because the condition is no good, this is your get on the condition that you must marry so-and-so. Because that condition is not valid, the get is valid. Right? In other words, they're divorced. So she's not allowed to marry that guy that was mentioned by her husband, but she can go marry anyone else. So far, that's what it seems to be saying. And the reason why the sages prohibited the husband from demanding that she marry a particular guy once she divorces him is because it'll seem like one guy is giving his wife to another guy. He's going to divorce her just so he can make a gift of her to his buddy. And the sages are saying, no way. Now the Gemara asks, do we not remove her from him, thereby allowing a married woman to marry anyone due to a rabbinic decree, lest people say that the husband is giving her as a gift? As long as the condition that she would marry a specific man is not fulfilled, she is a married woman by Torah law. He said, this is your get on condition you marry so-and-so. Are we now going to say, well, no, the condition is no good, but the get is good, therefore she's divorced, and now she can go marry whoever she wants? Or should we rather say that get is no good because the condition is no good, the get is no good, and she's simply still married to the first husband, and she's going to remain married to him until he gives her a proper get where he says, this is your get, you are hereby permitted to marry any other man, and then she can go marry any other man. So Rav Nachman said that this is what the Baraisa is saying. She may not marry him, i.e. the man who is specified in the condition, lest people say that they are giving their wives to each other as a gift. But if she marries him, she need not leave him, as we do not remove a woman from her husband due to a decree. So he's saying, well, the guy worded it in a way that makes sense, so she shouldn't marry that man, that the husband mentioned, by rabbinic decree. But if she did marry that man, then she fulfilled the condition, breaking the first marriage, so it's a valid divorce. And then she married the second man by Torah law, so we're not going to break them up. The sages are not going to break them up. Ab initio, she should not marry the man that her husband mentioned. But if she did, we allow that marriage to stand. And the children will be of unflawed lineage. We skip a few paragraphs. Rava said that the Baraisa should be interpreted in the following manner. This woman may marry neither the man who is specified in the condition, nor another man. She may not marry him lest people say that people are giving their wives to each other as a gift, and she may not marry another man, like all other men, because she is required to fulfill the condition. So Rav is saying, when her husband said, this is your get on condition you marry so-and-so, the condition is not valid, and therefore the get is not valid. She's not divorced. She's still married to her first husband. And if she marries the specified man, she need not leave him, as we do not remove a woman from her husband due to a decree. But if she gets married to some other man, she must leave him, as she is required to fulfill the condition before marrying another man. The husband said, this is your get on condition you marry so-and-so. We don't want her to do that by rabbinic decree, but if she does it, okay, that marriage stands. If the guy says, this is your get on condition you marry so-and-so, and she goes and marries someone else, she never fulfilled that condition. She's still married to the first husband. We make her leave that second husband. It is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rava. This woman may marry neither him nor another man, but if she marries him, she need not leave him. But if she gets married to another man, she must leave him, because the divorce never happened, as I just explained. New subject. The sages taught, Tosefta 7:8, that if a man says to his wife, this is your get on the condition that you fly up to the sky, or on the condition that you descend to the depths of the sea, or on the condition that you swallow a 4-cubit reed, or on the condition that you bring me 100-cubit reed, or on the condition that you cross the great sea by foot, or on any other condition that is impossible to fulfill, then it is not a valid get. I mean, sounds pretty obvious, right? Now we understand. If the condition is impossible, then it's not that we say there is no condition and the get is valid. Rather, the husband was playing with her, he was toying with her, he was just being a jerk. But what he said was, okay, fine. Here, you want to get? Here's your get on condition that you walk across the Mediterranean Sea on foot. Obviously, she can't do that. Therefore, there is no get. They are still married. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, a get like this is a valid get as the condition is void. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema said the following principle: with regard to any condition that cannot be fulfilled in the end, yet even so the husband stipulated it initially, he is only hyperbolizing. It is assumed that he did not really intend to attach a condition to the divorce, but rather to cause her distress, and therefore the get is valid. You would think he was just teasing her. Yeah, sure, this is your get on condition you cross the Mediterranean. But the sages step in and say, you know what? Wrong language, my friend. When you said that, when you added an impossible condition, the condition is considered nonsense and the get stands. So he did divorce her. And that is the law. We move forward to 85a and Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 9. If a man says to his wife while handing her a get, you are hereby permitted to marry any man, except to marry my father, or to marry your father, to marry my brother, or to marry your brother, to marry a slave, or to marry a Gentile, or to marry anyone to whom she cannot legally become betrothed, the divorce is valid. Since these men cannot betroth her anyway, his qualification is meaningless. Makes sense, right? She can't marry her own father. She can't marry her ex-husband's father. Those men are prohibited to her. So when he lists a bunch of people that she's prohibited to marry, well, she's prohibited to marry them anyway. The condition is meaningless, and therefore the get is valid. However, if he says to her, you are hereby permitted to marry any man, except for when doing so violates one of the following laws: the prohibition against a widow being married to a high priest, the prohibition against a divorcee or a yevama who performed chalitza, who's known as a chalutza, from being married to a common priest, or a mamzeret, a woman who was born of an adulterous union, or a Gibeonite woman being married to an Israelite man, or an Israelite woman being married to a mamzer or to a Gibeonite man, or marrying anyone to whom she can legally become betrothed, even if this betrothal would be a transgression, such as in the aforementioned cases. In all of these cases, the divorce is invalid. Right? She can't marry her own father. There's no such thing as marrying your own father. She betroths her father. The document of betrothal is meaningless. Nothing happened there because it's so prohibited. However, we know that a high priest cannot marry neither a divorcee nor a widow. But if he does marry a divorcee or a widow, what happens? He's married. She's his wife. He is disqualified from serving as the high priest. And his children, even his male children who are Kohanim, they're actually known as halalim, right? Because they are not permitted to serve as priests in the temple. But they're not mamzers. They're just disqualified priests. So the marriage is a real marriage. If a Jewish woman marries a Jewish man who is a mamzer, that marriage is prohibited and it will have consequences. But if they do it, they're still married, right? They're still married. It actually creates a betrothal. We might force them to separate. We might force him to give her a get. We might, visit consequences on them. But it is a betrothal. So if a husband says, this is your get, on condition that you do not marry a mamzer, she can marry a mamzer even though it's a transgression. Therefore, the husband is imposing a hold on her, a condition on her that will travel with her into her future life, and it is not a scroll of severance, and therefore it is not a valid divorce, and they're still married. What he said is meaningless. As opposed to, this is your get on the condition that you don't marry people who you cannot create a betrothal, then it is a valid get. And that is Mishnah number 2. Skip a paragraph. Rav raised a dilemma before Rav Nachman. If the husband says that she is permitted to marry any man except for a betrothal to so-and-so who was a minor at that time, what is the law? Do we say that now, since he is in any event not eligible for betrothal, as a minor boy cannot betroth a woman, so then the husband's qualification does not prohibit his wife to anyone, and it is a complete act of severance? Or perhaps, since this boy will reach eligibility for betrothal when he gets older, is the husband's qualification considered as prohibiting her to someone to whom betrothal could apply, in which case the get would be not valid? And what is the law on that? If he stipulated while handing her the bill of divorce that she is permitted to marry any man except for so-and-so who was a minor boy, it is not a valid divorce. Skip a couple paragraphs. Rava raised another dilemma. If the husband says that she is permitted to marry any man except for those who will be born in the future, what is the law? So she's permitted to marry any man in the world who's alive right now. but she's not permitted to marry people who will be born after she receives the get. Presumably she'd have to wait a while till those people reach age, but they don't exist yet. So since the condition is tied to people who do not yet exist, what happened? Did he create a get with a valid condition that if she married someone, years from now who wasn't born yet at the time of receiving the get, that the get would be retroactively invalidated and she was not divorced? Or do we say, since these people don't even exist, the condition is meaningless, it's a valid get, and she's completely free of this man? Rav Nachman said to him, you learn the solution to your dilemma in the Mishnah, which states that the husband says that she is forbidden to marry a slave or to marry a Gentile. The divorce is valid. If it is so that the future situations are taken into account, a slave and a Gentile are also likely to convert. Therefore, the husband is prohibiting her from marrying a man whom she might be able to marry in the future, which should render the divorce invalid. Evidently, only the present situation is taken into consideration. Right? We said that if she's not permitted to marry, right, you can't have a betrothal. It's not a valid betrothal under Jewish law for a Jewish woman to marry a Gentile or to marry a slave. Now, both the Gentile and the slave can become Jews who are permitted to marry her, but they're not that now. We said that if the husband said, here's your get on permission, you don't marry a slave or a Gentile, it's a valid get, even though there are slaves and Gentiles out there who could become Jews that she could later marry. So likewise, it seems that if the husband said, okay, you can marry anyone in the world except someone who's not born yet, even though they could be born later, it is a valid get, and in fact, that is the law. And that is the law. So we skip forward to Mishnah number 3 at the bottom of 85a. Mishnah number 3, here on page 85 out of 90 pages in Tractate Gittin, and we finally hit the basic essential element of a get is this language. You are hereby permitted to marry any man. That's the operational language that has to be included in the get. You might have thought that in Tractate Gittin, the law of the Bill of Divorce, we would open the book by saying the basic element that a get must contain is this language. But in typical manner of the sages, they started with very difficult dilemmas that interest them and only get to these basic building blocks near the end of the Masechta, near the end of the tractate. Rabbi Yehuda says that there is also another essential sentence that must be included in the get, and this is, quote, that you shall have from, and this is that you shall have from, and it should say, and this that you shall have from me is a scroll of divorce and a letter of leave and a bill of dismissal to go to marry any man that you wish. Right? So Rabbi Yehuda wants it to be more specific than you are hereby permitted to marry any man. He says all this extra language. This is a get, and it's a letter of leave, and a bill of dismissal to go marry any man you wish. And then Rabbi Yehuda adds also for the bill of manumission, right, which is a document that frees a slave. And the basic element of the bill of manumission for a female slave is you are hereby a free woman, or you are hereby your own, right? You own yourself. That's Mishnah number 3. And the Gemara says it is obvious that if one stated in a get for his wife, you are hereby a free woman, he has stated nothing, as that is not a statement of divorce. Similarly, if one stated in a bill of manumission for his maidservant, his female slave, you are hereby permitted to marry any man, he has stated nothing, as that is not the language of manumission, right? So if he got confused, and if he used the language of manumission when he's divorcing his wife, or he used the language of divorce when he's freeing his slave, he has done nothing, right? You have to use the correct legal language or you've done nothing. Okay, then we're going to skip a couple of, a bunch of stuff where the sages are getting very super precise on the laws of grammar and spelling in these particular words in the get. So if you're studying to be a scribe and you're going to write gets for people, so you should study the remainder of the discussion of this Mishnah number 3. But if you are ever actually getting a Jewish divorce, obviously you're not going to rely on your own understanding of this. You're going to go to a proper rabbinic court, and they're going to make sure that you follow the law properly. We go to 86a, Mishnah number 4, here in chapter 9. 3 gets are invalid ab initio. But if the woman marries another man on the basis of one of these flawed gets, the lineage of the offspring from the marriage is unflawed. In other words, she is not considered to be a married woman who engaged in sexual intercourse with another man, which would impair the lineage of their child, right? So in other words, if she has one of these gets that has a get with one of these flaws, she shouldn't remarry based on that flawed get. But the flaw is small enough that if she did remarry based on it, we allow the second marriage to stand, and the children are not considered mamzers, the children of an adulterous union by a woman who thought she was divorced when she wasn't. Now, what are the 3 flaws that we're talking about? A get that the husband, number 1, a get that the husband wrote in his handwriting, but has no signatures of witnesses on the document at all. Number 2, a case where there are signatures of witnesses on the document, but there is no date written on it. And number 3, a case where there is a date written on it, but it contains only one witness. These are the 3 invalid gets with regard to which the sages said, and if she marries, the lineage of the offspring is unflawed. That's the majority opinion. Rabbi Eliezer says, even though there are no signatures of witnesses on the document, but he handed it to her in the presence of 2 witnesses, it is a valid get. And on the basis of this get, the woman can collect the amount written for her in her ketubah, her marriage contract, even from liened property, as Rabbi Eliezer maintains that the witnesses signed the bill of divorce only for the betterment of the world. If no witnesses sign a get, the husband can contest its validity at any time by denying that he wrote it. Nevertheless, the witnesses' signatures are not an essential part of the get. Remember that what's essential, and we learned this from Rabbi Elazar, is that when the husband hands the get to the wife, witnesses see that action. Whether they signed the get itself or not, it's preferable that they do, but it's not essential. What's essential is that 2 witnesses can testify, we saw the husband hand this get, or the husband's agent hand this get to the wife, which was the moment that created the divorce, right? The halacha, if a get that is not signed by witnesses is transmitted to a woman in the presence of witnesses, the get is valid after the fact in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and he's relying on the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. That's Mishnah number 4. Now we go to 86b. With regard to the 3 flaws that create a get that a woman should not remarry based on this flawed get, but if she did remarry, it's a valid second marriage. So with regard to these 3 flaws, sometimes Rav said that if the woman remarries based on one of these gets, she must leave the second husband. And sometimes Rav said that she need not leave, right? So it seems like maybe Rav is disagreeing with the Mishnah in some cases, but not others. How so? How can the contradiction between Rav's statements be explained? If she already has children from her second husband, then she need not leave him. As if she is required to leave him, there will be slander that their children are mamzers. But if she does not have children from him, then she must leave him, right? So if she remarried based on this flawed get, we can say leave the second husband, get a proper get from the first husband, and now you can marry the second husband again. I think Rav is saying that. Or maybe he's saying you shouldn't have remarried based on that, and since you haven't had children, we're going to break off that second marriage, and the penalty to you is that since you remarried based on a flawed get, you're not going to be able to marry that second guy. And you certainly can't go back to the first husband because you slept with your second husband after you left your first husband, so you can't remarry the first husband. Not sure if Rav is saying that or not, because given that she could stay with the second husband if she's had children with him, I would think that what they're saying is you leave the second husband, get a proper get, and then you can marry the second husband, since the flaw is a minor flaw. Skip a bunch of paragraphs. It is stated in the Mishnah that Rabbi Elazar says, not Eliezer, but Elazar, even if there are no signatures of witnesses on the document, but rather he handed it to her in the presence of two witnesses, it is a valid get. Rav Yehuda said that Rav said that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar with regard to a get, meaning that is the law. As long as witnesses see the husband hand the get to the wife, or his agent does, it's a valid divorce, even if the witnesses have not signed the document. The question that the Gemara will discuss is, does this also apply to other kinds of contracts? Right? A contract that requires witnesses. Well, what if the witnesses didn't sign the contract, but they witnessed the creation of the contract? Does Rabbi Elazar's principle also apply there, or only to a get? Right. So says Rabbi Yehuda, when I said this law before Shmuel, he said that the law is in accordance with Rabbi Elazar with regard to monetary documents as well. That's going to become debatable. It is definitely valid in relation to a get. And the Gemara asks, but does Rav hold that with regard to monetary documents, the law is not in accordance with Rabbi Elazar? Doesn't Rabbi Elazar teach in the Mishnah that on the basis of this get, a woman can collect the amount written in her marriage contract, even from liened property? Apparently, Rabbi Elazar's ruling has monetary ramifications as well, but still in the realm of the get. Will it extend to just regular contract law? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Elazar made two statements, i.e. his ruling was both with regard to divorce and with regard to monetary documents, and Rav holds in accordance with his opinion with regard to one issue, meaning divorce, but he disagrees with Rabbi Elazar when it comes to other kinds of monetary documents. And that concludes our discussion that we're going to do here in our highlight show of Mishnah number 4. Now we go to Mishnah number 5 at the bottom of page 86b, Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 9. With regard to a case of two men who sent their wives two identical gets with an agent, as both their names and their wives' names are identical. So you happen to have both a guy named Shimon, the son of Reuven, who's going to divorce his wife, Rivka, the daughter of Yehuda, and both husbands have the same name, right? Whatever I said, Reuben, the son of Shimon. And both wives have the same name, Rivka, the daughter of Yehuda. So the two gets, which were written by the same scribe, are identical. Now, we already have talked about that a get has to be written for a particular woman, even though the language is exactly the same. We do need that intent. So what happens? With regard to a case of two men who sent their wives two identical gets with an agent, as both their names and their wives' names are identical, and the two gets were mixed up, the agent should hand both gets to this wife and both of them to that wife, so that each wife definitely received her get, although it is unclear which one is hers. Therefore, if one of the gets was lost before it was given to both women, the other is void because it is unknown which get was meant for which woman. Now, it's going to become a problem, but not much of a problem, for her to hold on to the get, because she might not end up with the right piece of paper, the one that was intended to her. But it doesn't really matter because a divorce is valid. Since we're not sure which get was written for which woman, the agent is going to hand both gets to the first woman and then both gets to the second woman and say, one of these gets is yours, I'm not sure which, but definitely one of them is yours, and I'm hereby handing it to you on behalf of your husband. You are now divorced. So they're going to be divorced. But if after the mix-up one of the papers was lost, then the other one is rendered void because you can't be sure which woman it was for, and they got to start the whole process over again. With regard to 5 husbands who wrote a general wording in the get, i.e. who wrote one common bill of divorce, one common get for their wives with a single formula, right? 5 cheap guys all had their gets written on one piece of paper. And what did they say? They said each one used the same formula, that so-and-so divorces his wife so-and-so, and so-and-so number 2 divorces his wife so-and-so number 2, and the witnesses sign below. So in this case, all of these gets that were combined into one get are valid, and the get must be handed to each and every wife individually, so they will all be divorced by it. The fact is, there were 5 separate gets, 5 separate language of you are hereby permitted to any other man. Use your husband by this name, by name, is divorcing you, the wife, by name. You are hereby permitted to any other man. But they wrote that same language. 5 guys all did it, shared one piece of paper, but there's a separate statement on each for each couple. And then witnesses signed that master document, and then the master document was in turn handed to each of the women, so then everybody's divorced. The 5 divorces are good. You can see why these women are lucky to be divorced from 5 guys who were so cheap that they all shared one document for the 5 gets. Now, if the scribe was writing a separate formula in the get for each and every couple, and the witnesses signed below, the formula with which the witnesses' signatures are read is valid. In other words, the formula directly underneath which they signed is valid, and the others are not valid. In other words, you could have, they have the exact same language for every couple of the 5 couples, and then you have 2 witnesses for all of it, that's valid. But if each couple used a separate formula of the language, and then, there were 2 witnesses for each of the formulas of language for each couple, okay, so then each writing within that master get that has a divorce language for a couple and 2 witnesses, that's valid for that couple. But if then another couple didn't get 2 witnesses for their language, they are not divorced. And that's Mishnah number 5. Now we skip forward. We're not even going to discuss the Gemara of Mishnah number 5. We're going to go forward to Mishnah number 6, still on page 87a. With regard to 2 gets that a scribe wrote on the same paper, one next to the other, and the signatures of 2 Hebrew witnesses, i.e. witnesses who signed in Hebrew from right to left, extend from underneath this get on the right to underneath that get on the left, and the signatures of 2 Greek witnesses who signed their names in Greek, which is written from left to right, and their signatures extend from underneath one column of divorce language on the left side of the paper, and their signature in Greek extends to the get that's on the other side, right? So in other words, you have language, right? 2 guys divorcing their wives on the same piece of paper. This is his get, and this is Shimon's get, and this is Reuven's get, each to their wives. And then over here, Reuven's get has witnesses who sign in Hebrew, and their names extend underneath this guy's get. And this guy has witnesses who sign in Greek, which is permitted. And those signatures extend from this side over to here underneath that guy's get. So that can create confusion. That's what we're addressing. So if that happened, then the get with which the names of the first 2 witnesses are read is valid, and the other get is invalid as it is not considered signed by these witnesses. I'm not going to get into the technicality of this. They get very precise on who's under which column, and the problem is that it creates confusion. So one of the gets is clearly signed by 2 witnesses. The second get, it's not clear if he has the other 2 witnesses, or if the first get that's definitely valid has additional signatures under it, and that's the problem. Now, if one witness signed in Hebrew from right to left, and the other witness signed beneath him in Greek from left to right, and underneath that signature, one witness signed in Hebrew, and beneath him, one witness signed in Greek, with the signatures extending from underneath this get to underneath that get, then both gets are invalid. That's Mishnah number 6. Now we go to the Gemara. The Gemara says, skip the first couple paragraphs, the Gemara says, but let this get on the left, the first one, be validated by the words Reuven, the son of, and let that get on the right be validated by the words Yaakov, witness. Didn't we learn in the same Mishnah that a signature that reads so-and-so witness, he actually wrote so-and-so witness, without the father's name is valid. You're supposed to say Reuven ben Shimon, Reuven the son of Shimon. But if you said Reuven witness, that's going to work. And the Gemara answers, it is a case where the word witness is not written. The latter side includes only a name, which is not sufficient. And if you say, actually, it is a case where the expression Yaakov, witness, is written underneath the second get, but it is a case where we know that this signature is not Yaakov's, evidently is part of the signature. And so you see the problem, unless you can absolutely confirm the intent of each witness, which get he's signing, and that he's signing it because he's there to serve as a witness, it's going to be problematic, and it could render the get invalid. Now we're on 87b toward the bottom, and I'm just going to read Mishna number 7, and then we're going to conclude for today. Yeah, we'll put it there. Tomorrow, Friday. Okay, so just reading Mishna number 7, and then I'll get a couple questions. If a scribe left out part of the get and he wrote it in the second column, i.e. the get is written in 2 columns. It's just one get from one husband to one wife. But he left out some language and then he added it in a second column. So if a scribe left out part of the get and he wrote it in the second column, i.e. the get is written in 2 columns on one paper, and the signatures of the witnesses are beneath the second column, so it is a valid get. But if the witness is signed at the top of the column, on the side, or on the back of an ordinary non-folded get, then it is invalid because it might seem like after the witness is signed, they added language. It has to be clear that when additional language was added, it happened before the witness signed and not after. If the scribe placed the top of this get next to the top of that get, so that both are written in the same column, but the text is in opposite directions, right? Like 2 gets on one piece of paper, right? And one get goes down this way, and the other get goes down this way. So clearly, these are 2 separate gets. They're not the same. So the scribe placed the top of this get next to the top of that get, both written on the same piece of paper but in different directions, and the witnesses signed in the middle between the gets, then both gets are not valid. If he placed the end of this get next to the end of that get and the witnesses signed in the middle between them, then the get with which the witnesses' signatures are read, i.e. the bill, the get that is written in the same direction as the signatures, that is valid. And if you place the top of this get next to the end of that get and the witnesses signed in the middle, so then the get at the end of which the witnesses are read, meaning the upper get, that is valid. With regard to a get that was written in Hebrew and its witnesses signed in Greek, or a get that was written in Greek and its witnesses signed in Hebrew, or in which one witness signed in Hebrew and the other witness signed in Greek, or if a get was written by a scribe and the scribe identifies his own handwriting and a second witness, right, the scribe is acting as a witness to his own writing, and another witness verifies his signature, it is valid as though 2 witnesses testified to ratify their signatures. And finally, as for the wording of the signature, if a witness signed so-and-so witness without mentioning his father's name, it is a valid signature. And similarly, if he did not write his name and instead wrote the son of so-and-so witness, it is valid. And if he wrote so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, but he did not write the word witness, it is valid. And this is what the scrupulous people of Jerusalem would do, i.e. they would sign without the word witness. As for the names of the husband and wife, if the scribe wrote his surname or nickname and her surname or nickname, it is valid. And that is Mishnah number 7. And with that, we'll conclude for today. The hour is late, so let me see if I can take a couple of questions. On pages 82 through 87. So we covered 6 dafs today while my Google Doc reloads. And tomorrow, the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, we'll do highlights of 3 pages. And then we'll make a siyum on tractate Gittin. So have a l'chaim, so we can make a little toast. Bill, question, can a man still prohibit his ex-wife from a specific man if he includes a time limit? For example, can a man say to his wife, here is your get on the condition you do not marry so-and-so for 2 years and have it be valid? Great question. My impression, based on what we've read, is that that would work. I think that would work because it has a time limit, just like this is your get on condition you don't drink wine or you don't visit your father's house for a month. So I think that would work. Sharon, so I continued with a couple of other Daf Yomi studies and did a siyum on Monday. Can I legitimately do a second siyum? What a good question. My understanding on that is if you're with people who are making a siyum, then you can certainly, like you wouldn't read Kaddish as the one making the siyum at that moment, but the ones who are making a siyum, you're answering amen to them, and then you could certainly make a l'chaim with a bracha and eat some food with a bracha. And we should always remember, we should say this, we should remind ourselves this all the time. And we've seen it not long ago. Was it in this tractate? I think it was in this tractate, or maybe in the previous one. That one who says amen when somebody else says a blessing actually gets even more credit than the one who said the blessing. Right? Saying amen is incredibly powerful. The one who says a blessing, very good. But he or she did, a one-person thing. When somebody else answers amen, it's like you put a seal on it. Now you've created a relationship based on that blessing. It is even more powerful. And it was compared to who has more credit. The general who starts the war or the general who ends the war. Certainly the general who ends the war. And so the one who says amen is like the general who ends the war. Nina and I watched Oppenheimer today. Perhaps that's why it's on my mind. Incredible movie. That's all I'll say. Really leaves you a lot to think about. Incredible filmmaking. Anyway, that's what I've got for us today. Look forward to see you all tomorrow, Friday, noon Pacific, for the highlights of the last 3 pages of Tractate Gittin, and we'll make a siyum on this tractate, and then we'll open Tractate Kiddushin. All the best, and Chodesh Tov.